We just heard the Beach Boys live on their 50th anniversary reunion tour with Do It Again. That song itself is now 50 years old, and it's one of the subjects covered in the latest issue of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine. David Beard, editor of ESQ, joins us once again, and the other big topic of discussion, which we'll get into a little later, is the somewhat controversial The Beach Boys with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra album, which sees original Beach Boys recordings treated with orchestral overdubs. While a lot of fans are divided about this release, the Beach Boys themselves love it. In fact, they love it so much, they recently reunited again to promote it. So there's a lot to talk about this week in Beach Boys land, and once again, let's welcome back David Beard.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
You know, let's start with Do It Again, released on July 8th, 1968, and it's the cover story in the latest issue of ESQ.
Yeah, we just did the coverage for this, so we had a nice article written by Robert Flory, and they had just finished the Friends album.
Right.
And the Friends album was really the last point in the Beach Boys' career where Brian, in the 60s, where Brian fully invested himself in the song cycle. And not even a month after the Friends album was released was this other song initially called Rendezvous, and then Surf Again, and then finally Do It Again. And it's just weird. If I think if it had found its way onto the Friends album, it certainly would have been a different listening experience. And I think the album would have fared better on the album charts. But now, when you look back at the song Do It Again, it's very well known. It is, you know, I think most fans of the song would say, oh yeah, it reminds me of those earlier Beach Boy hits, and I think that's why they make a connection to it and they enjoy it. I mean, that's fair to say, I think, in regard to my experience as a fan. But I don't think they knew. Well, I know they didn't. They did not know it was going to do what it was going to do. They did not have any preconceived notions about, oh, we're returning to a formula. It was just what came to mind. And they pressed it and released it as a single with Wake the World on the flip side, which was from the Friends album. I don't think the group really, they were happy, obviously, that they had a hit on their hands. But I don't think they really thought it was not a progressive song. It was not a song that moved their careers along artistically. And at that time in their lives, they were interested, most of the group members were interested in developing. So the song was not a next step in development. It was simply, really, truly a song that came to mind that worked and worked well. And it was a nice return to a collaboration of a hit single written by Mike Love and Brian Wilson.
Well, the Beach Boys may not have thought of it as a big deal back in 1968, and I know a lot of fans look at Do It Again and think of it as a step backwards and maybe a troubling sign of things to come. I don't necessarily agree with that, but regardless, it's certainly a song that the Beach Boys have done in concert ever since, and even solo. I've seen Brian Wilson a number of times, and he's always done that song, and he recorded it with his daughters on the I Just Wasn't Made for These Times soundtrack to that documentary. So it's clearly a song that at least he loves.
Yes. If you were to ask Brian, what is the best song that you wrote with Mike, there's every chance that he's going to say Do It Again, because he has in the past said Do It Again. Mike will certainly bring up Do It Again as one of their better collaborations. I think when you look at the catalog, when you look at the fact that October 66, Good Vibrations was the stellar hit that Mike wrote with Brian, and it's not nearly as dynamic as Good Vibrations, but here again, Brian and Mike writing a song together on top of the charts. So it's kind of really not a story. I mean, it's a happy accident. It's them returning to something simple. It is a simple song. You can hear that it's a simple song. It's lyrically simple. The idea is simple, and they had success with it. So I think many people would say, yes, it's a step backwards, because it goes back to simplicity. It goes back to almost the construct and the production used in 64 and 65. It's not a big production. But what it is it was a big hit for them. And I think it surprised all of them because I really don't think they, Bruce in particular just didn't think much of it. It was just okay, it's automatic when you talk to, the words work, okay. But to the group itself, I don't think Carl is always saying nice things, but I just don't think it was a big deal to them, other than the fact that it garnered money and, went up the charts.
Right.
Although out of this, though, what was cool, and it came so close to happening, and I sure wish it had, is they did a promotional film for it. I have to have it in front of me, and I don't have it in front of me, of course, but they did a promotional film for Do It Again, and they went to a Hobie surf shop. And so the video is they go to a Hobie surf shop, and then they go from a Hobie surf shop down to the surf, and they're in a Volkswagen van, and they get out of the Volkswagen van, and they all get in the ocean and go surfing. Of course, Brian's not a part of this, but the rest of them are, and Paul McCartney had agreed to be a part of this music video and was going to be the shop owner. But then, as fate would have it, the Beatles decided they were going to form Apple Records. So Paul had to leave before they did the video to go back to I guess, sign the papers or whatever it was. He had to leave. He could not stay to be the mock surf shop owner, so he was not able to be in the video. And Bruce confirmed this, and that's pretty cool because that video is really super rare. It's notable because Bruce and Dennis actually did surf, so they do get these boards. They actually are filmed surfing, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and maybe that was an image that worked for that moment in time. I don't want to belabor this, but 1968 was a very, very heavy year with political assassinations and riots. I mean, it was a very bleak time. And maybe this throwback, although I think of it more, like I said, a step sideways than a step back, maybe this feel-good summer single resonated with people because we were sitting around thinking, just a few years ago, we were all happy. Well, what the heck happened?
Well, yes, but it's just surprising it became a hit because music had changed so much. By summer of '68, music had really changed, and people were listening to the Doors and Hendrix and and other types of music and the Moody Blues. So this song is culturally not that way, and so it's just a surprise it became a hit.
So there it is, the record we're talking about today with Endless Summer Quarterly editor David Beard, Do It Again. That was the 2012 stereo mix of Do It Again. And yeah, it was a hit record, and I know that some hardcore fans think of it as a betrayal of what had just come before, the great work with Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations and Into Wild Honey and Friends and all of a sudden this thing. But I can sum it up like this. In the Beatles' promotional film for Hello, Goodbye, they're pictured wearing their Pierre Cardin collarless suits that they wore in 1963. That was not a signal to the audience that from now on they were going to be wearing the suits again and they were going to recreate that entire early image. They did it as kind of like a fun thing, to throw into the middle of the Hello, Goodbye video. And that's kind of what this song is, too. It wasn't signaling this is the new direction we're going to go in, which was we're going to pretend like it's 1963. Again, it was just like this, sideways step. And you know what? One of the things we should mention, in keeping with that grand tradition of studio chatter being heard on the final product, you can hear Brian say, "Cool the talking" at the beginning of the cut. And that stereo mix, the reason I played it is because it sort of opened that track out, and there's a horn section on there I really didn't hear all that clearly before. I mean, there's just great stuff going on that song.
Well, there's a lot going on with all Beach Boys songs, and it's a good recording. I mean, it's just a fun song, good recording. Return to it's kind of a nostalgic song, looking back. I don't think of it as a sideways step. I do look at it as a direct link to the past. But it is what it is, and again, it garnered them a hit record on the end of an album that did nothing. That was lucky to be on the charts. So yeah, I mean, again, happy accident. They managed to get back on the radio. They managed to have chart success. Born out of the simple idea of let's write a song the way we used to and see how it turns out, which is essentially what they did, because it was called Rendezvous, then Surf Again, and there's the mix, just like you can hear Brian talking. There is one point, if you really listen hard, you can hear Surf Again in the background underneath Do It Again. I'm glad they changed it to Do It Again, because Surf Again really pigeonholed them back into this ideology of that they're the Beach Boys, Surfing USA, and all that. So the song does do that. The song does go backwards. It goes back to All Summer Long. It goes, Don't Back Down from That Wave. It goes back to Summer Days, Summer Nights, which is fine. It's what... And it proved to them, and what further on went on in 1974. They came out with a 2-record set called Endless Summer. It shot to the top of the charts. They had to change what they were playing in their set list during concert performances because that's what people wanted.
One by one.
Now, if that version of Don't Worry Baby sounded different to you, that's because it is. It's from the new album, The Beach Boys with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Now, I'm going to state for the record here that when I heard about this album, I said to myself, no thanks. I'm not a fan of messing around with the original recordings. I think Beach Boys music and those records are some of the best records ever produced by anyone. They're not missing anything. And I'm perfectly fine with what I already have. 2 events caused me to give this album a chance, and I can tell you that I'm glad I did. The first event was hearing about 2 upcoming similar releases, one for Billy Fury and one for the Carpenters. When I heard about those records, I said, oh, you know what? That's a good idea because it keeps their music out there and it'll expose people to the Carpenters and Billy Fury especially, and they'll get to hear. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a colossal hypocrite. You know, I should give this Beach Boys album a chance. And then the other big event was the fact that all of the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, Mike Love, Al Jardine, Bruce Johnston, David Marks, they were all on board with this, and they love it so much so that they reunited just this past week and did a big radio special for Sirius XM and talking about the Beach Boys channel on there and talking about this Royal Philharmonic release and how much they love it. And I thought, wow, if they love it that much, I mean, if Brian Wilson, who made those original records, loves this that much, then I should at least give it a chance. David, what has been your experience with this album?
Well, you know, I had interviewed the producers, Don Reedman and Nick Patrick, as well as executive producer Jerry Schilling. And Jerry, of course, comes from having experienced or been exposed to previous Royal Philharmonic projects. They've done 3 for Elvis. And so Jerry Wood had been exposed to those releases and knew Don or knew of those producers because of that. And then, so what they did then, the Royal Philharmonic would go on tour, and they would play what they played on these Elvis albums, and they would have Elvis on the screen, the video screen, on a big screen behind them on stage, and Elvis would be singing just like he is on those albums. I haven't seen these, and I don't have those albums. But when Jerry spoke of those during the interview and how they did that, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because I knew from the Beach Boys 2012 tour that Carl was on the big screen and singing to God Only Knows while the Beach Boys sang with him. And so I understood the concept. And then with Elvis, Aretha Franklin, and Roy Orbison, Royal Philharmonic had done these albums, and with Roy Orbison, they actually took Pretty Woman and had, I guess Roy's got 3 sons who each play instruments, so they brought them in, and they had the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra with Roy's 3 sons all playing to Oh Pretty Woman using Roy's voice. I'm like, that's pretty creative. And so I had this understanding of the process. And so when I interviewed Don Reedman and Nick Patrick, really my interest with interviewing them was, with the knowledge of what they'd already done, was to ask them, were they fans of the Beach Boys, and which they both were as kids, like most of us, and had been exposed to the music, and then understanding their approach and how they approached it. And when they explained to me, especially Don Reedman, that their biggest concern, because unlike Aretha Franklin, Roy Orbison, and Elvis Presley, who are each individual singers, the Beach Boys, at times, you are dealing with 6 vocals. And so that's a different dynamic. You're dealing with something that's far more, I would imagine the word is challenging, because you're trying to do it tastefully. And so when I spoke to them and interviewed them, that's kind of what my interest was, is understanding their process and how they were trying to approach these songs, because, you know, we've heard these songs so many times over and over and over and over through the years in different compilations on the original products that they were released on, whether it's Fun, 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 California Girls, Kokomo, Heroes and Villains, Good Vibrations, what have you. We've heard these songs over and over and over, so why, and maybe this was your thought process, is why would it take the time to listen? Because I've heard these songs. I already have these songs. And so what was intriguing to me during this interviewing process was how they spoke about really being mindful of not, first of all, letting the vocals be the star. And then when I was listening to it, because I'd gotten the advanced music, I was listening to it and I thought, well, what is this? This doesn't sound like an orchestra. I'm hearing drums that sound like the original drum track. So then I had to ask there for the notes from the record company so that I could look at how they did this. And then surprising to me was that it wasn't just vocals, because that's what I thought it was just vocals with the Royal Philharmonic. And it's not that. It's the vocals with the Royal Philharmonic, but in many cases, the majority of the album, it's also some of Brian's original arrangements, tracks, recordings. So like the Wrecking Crew is there on many of these recordings. And then so what the Royal Philharmonic did, not only did they try as best they could to Don Reedman and Nick Patrick's direction, because they're the producers. They're not members of the Royal Philharmonic. They're the producers. So their goal, they said to the Royal Philharmonic, what we're trying to do here is we want the Beach Boys' voices to really shine. We want to supplement. We want to supplement these really well-curated classic songs. We want to go in and we want to supplement them. And that was their goal. And I can tell you, Don Reedman is a huge Pet Sounds fan. And so he even said this to me. He said when he went to Jerry and was talking to Jerry about doing this, he said, you know, in his mind, this was like he artistically wanted to approach this like Pet Sounds 2. In other words, make something from an orchestral standpoint as beautiful. Because anyone who is a Beach Boy fan, now, granted, maybe not Fun, Fun, Fun or any of the early hits, but when you got into more of the dynamic recordings, like maybe say, not that, I mean, they're all great songs, but let's say, Wouldn't It Be Nice, God Only Knows, You Still Believe in Me, are on this collection, and I don't think it's an accident that there's several songs from Pet Sounds on this collection, and that's because Don Reedman's a huge Pet Sounds fan. So you can hear that they really care about the Beach Boys. I can. And I'll make a note, in April I happened to be down in Florida, and I went to a St. Augustine show, and at that time Bruce Johnston had the album artwork on his phone, and I guess he had the tracks and was listening to them, and he was really excited.
Right.
And that alone, that experience, being around the guys when a new release is coming out, and they're genuinely into it. So that got my interest enough to respect out of the gate that whatever this is, that I should at least give it a listen and be open to whatever it was. And then, also the fact that Bruce comes from a classical kind of music background. And Bruce worked with the Royal Philharmonic 20 years ago for his Symphonic Sounds album.
Right.
And that's its own really beautiful thing. If you listen to the Water Planet suite that he did, that's really beautiful. And he did Disney Girls on that, but this Disney Girls is better. Don Reedman, Nick Patrick, and the Royal Philharmonic were truly respectful to these tracks. Now, Al Jardine told me that he wanted to include, I think it was California Saga or Cotton Fields, and Lady Linda. And Lady Linda would have been...
Oh, of course. It's halfway there.
Yeah. So I think, if this does well, I think similarly to the Elvis Presley products, which there were two, and then the third one was a Christmas album, that this could happen with the Beach Boys. And it's not a horrible thing. I've actually had friends who are, very, very, very ingrained in the Beach Boys, and this surprised me, he said it made him angry when he listened to it. And I thought, wow. For one, I said, well, then don't listen to it anymore. You don't want to be angry. But what was the word he used? Oh gosh, arrogant. That it sounded like the process of the producers was arrogant, and I don't hear that. But again, it's subjective. But I think if you just love the Beach Boys music, and you love, depending on your age, I'm 53, I've gotten to a point in my life where I just like music. And I think I've said this before to you, I've been accused of being easy to please, so I don't know if that's what it is, but when I see the Beach Boys in these webisodes being positive and into what they're hearing, all of them, then I do these interviews, and then you hear the product. I thought, well, you know what? If Brian, Mike, Al, and Bruce are into this,
and it went to number one on the classical chart, so it did actually provide the Beach Boys with the number one album in 2018.
Yeah, a number one album in a new genre, in a new area, which is great. Then it is reaching a new audience. So if you like it, fantastic, because it's for you. If you listen to it and you're not so much into it, and you're like, well, I don't know. I get it. I'm a completist. I got it in my collection, but it doesn't really do much for me. And I'm going to go get Pet Sounds back, and I'm going to listen to Pet Sounds because I prefer the original. Well, so be it. But again, that's what this all does. This is, I always, if music points to music and gets you to engage in music, or maybe even a Beach Boy fan bought this album, really enjoyed it, and said, you know what? I'm going to get these other albums. I'm going to get this Aretha Franklin album and this Roy Orbison album and these Elvis albums. Victory. And for that reason, it's all good.
All right, David, so what's happening with Endless Summer Quarterly these days?
Well, the summer edition's available right now, and the interviews I mentioned are in that edition with Jerry Schilling, who's the executive producer of the Royal Philharmonic with the Beach Boys album, Don Reedman and Nick Patrick, who are the producers. I think I may be the only guy who got these interviews. I don't know how I managed that. Well, thanks to Jerry, of course. Mike Love and Al Jardine, and I got a couple of quotes from Bruce. And I did do there's a lot of coverage to the new album in there. So if you buy the new album, the new edition is a perfect companion piece because you can read the whole story of how the album came together. It's kind of a really unique behind-the-scenes that I've touched on in this conversation. It just ties it all together, explains from Jerry Schilling to Don Reedman, Nick Patrick, to the Beach Boys and how it all came together, the selection process, how all the Beach Boys gave it their seal of approval and had their thumbprint on it. So for the surviving Beach Boys, not only to like the project, but to be involved in the project, the track selection, and then approve it, is as close to a new Beach Boys album as you're going to get. And that's pretty cool. And then the Do It Again conversation is in there. And then the next edition, because of the new release album, we had to kind of push the 30th anniversary of Kokomo and Brian Wilson's first album that had Brian's name on it as a solo release,
right,
which came out in July of '88, and then Kokomo came out a few weeks after. It was so ironic that the Beach Boys, without Brian Wilson, would have a #1 hit right after Brian released his first official solo album. Is just the strangest twist of history that you could possibly imagine. And so I've interviewed, for that edition, I've interviewed Mike Love, I've interviewed about Kokomo, and I've got a couple of other people in line for that discussion. And then Brian Wilson's solo album, I interviewed Seymour Stein, who was behind the production of the album. I've got an interview with Andy Paley, who co-wrote much of the material with Brian on the album, Mark Lynette, who helped engineer the album, Russ Titleman, who, if Beach Boy fans know this, Russ actually worked with Brian back in the 60s on a couple of tracks, most notably the Glenn Campbell single, Guess I'm Dumb. He co-wrote that with Brian. So that, and then here we are years later after the fact, Russ is then again working with Brian. He wrote Love and Mercy with Brian, so among 4 other songs. So I also did an interview with Russ Titleman, and that's still coming together. I've hopefully trying to land a couple of other interviews for that too. So it's coming together really nicely. It's going to provide insight into that album that has never been disclosed before. Oh, and David Leaf, of course, who wrote the huge press kit. Right. So a lot of stuff's going to come out about that album, the making of that album that's not been available before. Same is true about Kokomo. And and I should mention to the listeners, Endless Summer Quarterly now has a brand new website. It's user-friendly, and by that I mean we had kind of a site that's been up for years that just wasn't really working from the standpoint of being mobile-friendly, tablet-friendly, desktop-friendly. It's there now, it's up, and we have most of our catalog dating back to the first issue we did here on the West. It was on the West Coast, founded in '87. Lee Dempsey and I took it over in August of '93. So I did my due diligence in creating this new site, and we really have put a lot of effort, time, and energy and thought into the new site. Same website, which we wanted to keep it easy. It's just esquarterly.com. That's esquarterly.com. Of course, we're on Facebook, so if you look us up, like us, and again, just remind everyone, Endless Summer Quarterly still is an actual physical publication. So, if you love the Beach Boys, you'll love Endless Summer Quarterly.
As always, thanks so much, David, and we'll do it again real soon.
Thanks for having me on.